You are listening to Fika with Vicky on United Public Radio, 107.7 and 105.3 from New Orleans.
Hello everyone and welcome to Fika. Our guest this week is Imelda Almqvist. A basic description of her work would say she is an author, painter, teacher, and forest witch. And that's the description I used in the details for this week's show. But once you enter her world, it is so much bigger than that. It is full of color, scent. I smell pine trees personally. And open-minded thoughts and questions. The kind of thoughts and questions that have your mind running from point to point with eagerness and hope. So much so that you realize you forgot to take notes or even find your favorite quote. Because these books were meant to be absorbed meaningfully and slowly, not with a Fika deadline. And so in the future, I intend to go back, reread them, and do just that. I may even read them a third time. Welcome to Fika, Imelda.
Thank you for having me.
So you just got back, recently. I'm surprised you agreed to do this interview. Like just a couple of days ago, you got back home from doing some extensive traveling. Can you tell us about some of the experiences that you had during that traveling and how traveling in general relates to your work?
Well, I was talking to someone, a friend of mine recently, and sort of realized that he has a very strong sense of village. And I thought I lack that. But then I thought again, and I think my village is the whole world. I think I have the mindset of a global village. So for me, traveling, it's about meeting people. It's about immersing myself in another culture. So I was like meeting friends in New York recently. And I was like, similar to London, where I am today in some ways, but also very different. And I think that traveling is also about belonging in all places, feeling at home everywhere and nowhere, and being like a messenger and a person who, opens themselves to different cultures and different ways of doing things. And I find that that's what enriches my soul. It gives me ideas for paintings. And also I think it keeps my mind fresh because I'm constantly being challenged.
So it's the food that fuels what you do, like the energy that.
I think travel of all kind, but even like being a psychonaut and traveling in my own mind and sort of, exploring my own imagination and going into the forbidden territories and the border territories and the liminal zones, doing a lot of reading, like watching other people's work and staying in dialogue with a large number of people to always sort of hear what another perspective is on the same thing. And then trying to, it's very mercurial, trying to open myself to all of these messages. And then trying to work out, like, where do I land? What rings true? Or like, what is not being spoken? What is it that I need to add to the conversation?
Which just proves, people, what I said about the books. You really have to think there's activities in these books too to get things straightened out in your own mind, but you really have to think when you're reading these books. They don't just, there's a lot. Like I said to Imelda earlier, I have everything from Yule Ghost to the 1980s Satanic Panic in my head. They broach a lot of things, but it all comes together perfectly. Imelda does that perfectly. So while you were out there too, I saw some lovely pictures on social media from your forest school on the east coast of Sweden. And can you tell us a little bit about what you do there, what your students do there?
I would be delighted to. And my husband is Swedish, and we've been together for 37 years. I was like a teenager when I met him, so I speak fluent Swedish. I spent a lot of time in Sweden. I lived there for a while. So, like sometimes in interviews, I'm introduced as Swedish. So thank you for getting it right. I'm actually Dutch. But 7 years ago, we bought a house in Sweden. We weren't planning to do it, but the spirits had ideas and it sort of came our way. So it was completely unplanned. And then as we were sort of, like set deep in the forest on, where the forest meets the sea, it's an hour south of Stockholm. And as we're looking at that property, and like I've always wanted to return to Sweden and live there more so than in London. I got talking to the spirits and to the gods that I work with, the Norse gods, and they said, Imelda, we will make sure you get this house, but the thing is, you need to use it to bring other people home. You need to start a school here. There are like many people whose spirituality has become disconnected from their ancestors. The Vikings, traveled a very long way. And that means that there are an awful lot of people who have like Old Norse, Scandinavian, even Dutch. The Dutch traveled as well, ancestry all over the world. And they said that, it's going to be like your house, but there's like another building there, which, has become a school. And they sort of said, that's the energy imprint. That's what we're asking of you, because there were some issues with the negotiation. And then when I sort of, I made a vow, I made a promise, and I did some ceremonial work, and all the sort of obstacles that had been in the negotiation with the estate agent, they dissolved immediately. So later that evening, we were told the house is yours. So, and that's what I do. So I teach courses there in Seiðr and Old Norse Traditions, which is all ancestral wisdom material from Northern Europe. And, invite people to come to my school and also be on that land. I consider the spirits of the land to be my colleagues and, the greater teachers. They're bigger teachers than I am. And I cannot express, like almost weekly, someone will talk about how like coming to the school took them deeper than anything they had done on a spiritual level, something that had not been ancestral and not of their own lineage. It's still beautiful and powerful, but to sort of go to a place where your ancestral blood runs and where your ancestors walked, it makes people burst into tears. It like takes them very, very deep. So essentially, that's what I do there.
And that is truly a gift, because I have considered that myself when I've been discussing things with different people, indigenous to this country, and they talk about, their land and what it feels to be on it. And I just think exactly what you just said. What would it feel like to go back to, long time ago, go back to Ireland, or anywhere around the North Sea, really. But and to be on that land, to feel on that land, and I always felt that it would be an emotional experience. And you just proved that, what you talked about, those people to go
That's
back.
what students tell me. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I completely believe it. I can see that. I can see that happening.
Yeah.
It, it's exactly so. You are helping students of of that have, well, Scandinavian in general, would you say, ancestry, or
Well, are people
specifically?
who feel drawn to it. Like, I don't go and check their ancestry
No,
records. Like,
no,
like,
I'm just saying. I
you
want to
know,
make sure I get the right terminology. Like, should
yes,
be?
but that is a main reason. Or sometimes people are from like other parts of Europe and they've always been drawn to Norse mythology, or some people just have like me, a strong fascination with the North. Like if I really had my way, I'd live in Greenland. I'd go even further north, and we'd have been born Inuit, but I'm not. I was born Dutch, so you got to like know your limits. But
I'm sorry, Imelda, if I could do something about that. No, I hear you completely. There is a reason why this is called Fika, okay? Because
yeah.
I just love that whole culture, and the North, and obviously because I have the Northern Lights as my background and my brand,
Beautiful.
and so I completely understand that. I did have a relative that did, and all of them are different for different people, whatever, that did a DNA, and there was like, like a small bit at the end, and long, long, long time ago, I would think, and I was just like, yes. Yes. I don't remember anything about that. I don't, but there is a calling. So I get that. So speaking of like going back to ancestral, or back to um, ancient ancient spirituality and the ancestors and things, you've been doing some in your book. Messy notes, people. I already explained that today. Okay. My notes are messy. In North Sea water in my veins. You go back to recreating the indigenous belief systems, pre-Christian, for the lower
Low
um,
countries.
Low Countries in Europe. So first of all, tell everybody what the who the Low Countries are, and what inspired you to do that, and how that's going.
Well, the Low Countries is, you first think of the Netherlands, because if you translate that, Netherlands just means Low Countries, but it's actually slightly larger region, because, the borders of countries have been redrawn in recent times. So it also includes the Flemish part of Belgium, part across the German border. So the area is like a bit larger than just the Netherlands, but it focuses primarily on the Netherlands. The Netherlands are at the heart of it. And
Oh, I was gonna say I read that other people actually encouraged you to do this because
well,
they said
yes, you
you were
well, you
busy in Sweden.
exactly. I'm busy in Sweden, but then Dutch students start appearing in Sweden and signing up for courses with me in London. And people had asked me that before, Dutch people saying, well, you're quite good at research, you speak many languages, so you're very comfortable going into all of these languages in a way that, not many people can. And they said, you being Dutch, like, when are you going to write that book about the Netherlands? And I just thought, what a crazy idea. I haven't lived in the Netherlands for, like, what is it now, 30 years. So I was like, yeah, maybe one day. But I wasn't really, going to do it. And then, another, like a year later, another Dutch student came, and he sat me down and he said, like, Imelda, it's like, what's available on the market in the Netherlands. You have to get a lot of different books, and they all like tackle one sort of subject. We need one book that brings it all together. And he says, having read your books, I think you are the one to do it. And at that point, I thought, oh God, not that again. And I'm busy enough as it is. But then I thought, well, okay. And also to keep him happy, I said, okay, well, I'll look into it. And then the summer break came, and I was in Sweden. And I thought, well, I'm not really going to do this, but let's do a little bit of research, because I thought, he wanted a book about the pre-Christian spirituality of the Netherlands. And I thought, well, the Netherlands are so secular now, and it's such a modern, progressive country. I thought, I'm just going to scratch the surface, and I'm going to find almost nothing, and that will be the end of it. And I'll just tell him that, and I'm off the hook. So
It didn't work that way.
it didn't work that way. So I started doing research, and, like, pretty quickly, I think within 2 weeks or so, I was like, I would sort of pick a daily topic, and I ordered all these books in Dutch delivered to my mother's place in the Netherlands, and I had to go and collect them there because they don't ship them abroad. So my mother had all these book deliveries piling up in her home for the elderly. But that was fine. And so I started reading these books as well. And it was like, my world was turned upside down. And it's what I learned none of this when I was in history classes in secondary school in the Netherlands. Like amazing things that I've never heard of. And I sort of very quickly realized that, you could actually write a very thick book about the pre-Christian spirituality of the Netherlands. And, my book, well, it's still a substantial book. The publisher did say there is like a word limit, so you can't go beyond that point. But I filled it up right to the word limit, and I could have filled another book, because there is so much material. And then the question becomes that, in the Netherlands, as in many other places, there is still this idea, oh, we lost our spirituality. Maybe we need to look at what Native Americans do and have sweat lodges, or maybe we need to go to the, Peru or the Amazon River. And, there are clearly issues with that. I think we'll talk about that later. But my question became, is there enough material for a reconstruction or a revival, of indigenous material that comes from the soil that I and other people grew up on? And, I sort of discovered there is more than enough material. There is not actually a need to borrow a spirituality from other countries. There's plenty here, but it simmers just under the surface of culture, you know, because I sort of realized that there were a lot of like things I was introduced to in childhood where you think, oh yeah, that's the way we do things in the Netherlands. And only when I did all of that research did I start to understand where that came from and how old it was and how it had traveled to us, like all the way through the Middle Ages and up. And you think, aha, that's why we do that. And that for me was a huge moment. It was that my life turned upside down for a while. I had to walk around in a state of shock for a little while working on that book.
And I wanted to say that when I picked this book up, it wasn't with any idea of learning about, because that is not my ancestry, like the Netherlands specifically, or any of those countries. It was the whole idea of the reclamation and to understand all stories of all people, because that's how you understand people. Like you said, we think it's all buried underneath, but then you wonder why great Aunt Martha always, did this or that, hung
Hmm.
her clothes a
Hmm.
certain way or
Yeah.
whatever it was.
Yeah.
That there's a reason for that. So yeah,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
definitely filled up that book. And so is there another one coming, or are you just going to quit now with that
I'm not
one?
going to quit, but I'm currently working on 2 handbooks for rune magicians because I have a lot of rune magician students and they've been pestering me and pestering me. And every time I get delayed because I have so many teaching engagements, I'm flying all over the world, which is all very wonderful. But like these books are moving slowly. And then also I'm teaching a lot of webinars as well to sort of, keep people all over the world sort of, happy and engaged. So unfortunately, I've done more webinar writing than book writing recently. But, I'm desperate to get back to it and finish these 2 books. And what I will do after that, I don't know. Maybe it's up to another Dutch person to write like another, and people do, but mostly they write in Dutch. And I chose to write my book in English. Being a traveler and not having lived in the Netherlands for decades, I thought, yeah, if I write in Dutch, only Dutch people who grew up there and speak the language are going to read it. But if I know, actually, I want to make the material available to all the people who have like ancestry or another like affinity or
That have been taken away from that, and
yeah, yeah,
they're wanting to
yeah.
return to it. And you did a very good job of that. What was the most surprising thing you found? Like the thing that we always have our
Yeah.
favorite little stories from this. What was yours?
I think for me it was, as I've described in my first book, Natural Born Shamans, that from a very young age I did what I now know is called psychopomp work or being a soul conductor. And that was working with the spirits or the souls of dead people and making sure they got safely to the afterlife. And as a child, I had no word for that because I grew up in a Roman Catholic family. So it was 20 years later I sort of realized that anthropologists had a word for that. So when I started doing the research that in the Netherlands, the feast of Saint Nicholas, we call him Sinterklaas, is a really big deal. So his birthday is on the 6th of December and the eve is on the 5th of December. And then there is, a lot of festivities around that. And he's depicted as this kind elderly saint. He looks a bit like Santa Claus or like a bishop, more like, who comes and brings gifts to children in the Netherlands, but also like checks out that they haven't, been naughty and stuff like that. So, and for all of my life, I thought of him as this sort of benign, saintly figure. Look, it's kind of like entertainment for children, and also keeping children in check a bit. If you don't behave, Sinterklaas might not give you presents. And then as I started sort of going down into the past of like about who Saint Nicholas really was, then I sort of discovered that many centuries ago, he was actually the great psychopomp in the Netherlands, and he actually is connected to like the wild hunt and other sort of Norse phenomena that I teach in Sweden, but that he actually came with a very big sack that did not originally hold presents for children as it does today. He came to collect the souls of the people who had died that year and who had not made a good transition. So he came as a soul conductor, a psychopomp, and then also before the year's end. And that's an art we have lost. There needs to be a cleansing. Like ideally, when an old year ends, we need to sort of ceremonially deal with all the sort of, the energies and sort of, like undo what didn't serve and like unravel intentions that we no longer have. So we kind of like need to clear the space for the new year. So the new year can be born and it can be unencumbered by all the energies of the previous year. So that's very much what the wild hunt and the liminal 12 days and all of that is about between Christmas and Epiphany. And Sinterklaas sort of, links into that because he was the psychopomp, because it is believed that when the souls of many people do not cross over, meaning like they die, but they stay energetically too close to earth and they become either wandering souls or lost souls, but like they're not and have not come to the right destination, that actually places burdens on the living and on the world. That's not a good situation. So Sinterklaas would come at that time of year with his big sack and take those souls away in a compassionate way. He made sure they went to the land of the ancestors, land of the dead, however you conceptualize that. And that would then sort of help create the right circumstances for the next year to be a better year. And I sometimes think, well, bored and do that in the world of like world politics. There was a blip.
Yeah, we had a blip. So, oh no, 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 I'm not sure who blipped, whether you blipped or I blipped. we had a bit of it. So I left at, we sort of need to do that with politicians. No, I'm not exactly if that's what you said, but we need to. I agree completely. And so in a way, Cinder Claus does provide a great gift by giving
He
them
does.
passage across into other spaces, more peaceful spaces. And you talk a lot in the book about the fact that we don't ritualize, or we don't have rites of passage or whatever for the end of the year, for death, for for anything that's really important. We've sort of gotten further away from that, and the dangers of doing that with death is that this is how I took it. So correct me or whatever. I just want to see if I was right for myself. People, it has nothing to do with you, audience, but that by separating us from death, we are going to become less compassionate about it. We're not going to worry about if we hit that puppy on the highway, or other things, because it doesn't have that significance to us. Is that?
Yeah, and I think there is denial as well, because our ancestors lived much closer to death. They didn't have the modern hospitals and insurance policies, and and also death wasn't sanitized. It happened in people's homes, and children saw their grandparents die, and then the wake would be in the home, like it still is in Ireland, I believe. So death was a normal part of everyday life, and that also meant that everyone knew that death could come calling anytime. Hopefully when you're old, but maybe when you're young. Well, in Western culture, we kind of shut it away, we sanitize it, it happens behind closed doors, we keep children away from the process if they are young. And then what happens is that we collectively end up living in a kind of spirit of denial. And then you get a whole sort of host of other problems, such as, people who do not grow up fully, or, like the sort of drive to look young forever and to be young forever, and not at all like meeting the obligations that you would culturally have had in the past, to become a proper elder in your culture, a role model for younger people, a mentor for those around you, as you pass through these sort of stages and you make these passages in your own life. So it actually leads to a very large constellation of other problems, I would say.
Yeah, so the further we get away from nature, the more problems that we have. Because I mean, the death thing, the whole youth worshiping, like, is such a big thing. People spend the last years of their lives totally upset with themselves, fighting with their body and what it's naturally doing, instead of enjoying that time and
Mm.
preparing for what is ever to come. So yeah, no, exactly. See, the books were not my. See, she writes the way she talks.
I do. I do.
Exactly. I felt like I just
Yeah.
spent the last while with Imelda. I mean, I've never met her before this, guys, but it's just like, oh, I know exactly how she talks and exactly who she is, because this is like a conversation with Imelda on paper. Okay. So I'm so delighted. Um, oh, okay. So here's a comment. It was great to see her. We'll put it up. So that was great to see her on
Oh, yes.
Exotistic
Yeah.
Britain. What are her thoughts on the tie between the early inhabitants walking across the land bridge from Scandinavian countries to now England, and possibly living in areas where the sea is now?
Well, I think that is very, very interesting because, of course, water levels were lower when more water was locked up in ice. So in the ice age, and the land in Scandinavia is still rising, but there was like a whole swathe of land, and Doggerland in particular. It's almost kind of like sensationalist, like a mini Atlantis. There was like a just sort of north of, like, sort of to the east of the UK and north of the islands in the Netherlands, there was a landmass called Doggerland, where like people lived and where they were leading their lives, which became submerged by water and is now on the bottom of the sea. There were also forests in that place. So people who go diving off the east coast of England, they will actually like find trees and they're like underwater forests there. So that can get quite eerie and spooky. So it is absolutely true that because more water was locked into ice, and there was more land, there was less water than there is today. So people could travel and walk these really long distances, and they did so. So the whole land looked very different from the way it does today. So yeah.
So she says yes. She does think yes. Right? So bringing us, we'll okay. We were on death, but and the need for ritual and reclaiming the lowlands, indigenous pre-Christian spirituality, and we came back to the episode on Mystic Britain. And if you're out there listening and you would catch that, there's 2 seasons of Mystic Britain. It is on the Smithsonian Station. It is episode 8. Ice Age Shaman. However, for some reason they have them mixed up. So if you want to watch it, you have to watch episode 7, Human Sacrifice, because those 2 episodes are mixed up for some reason. I don't know. I haven't written this Smithsonian station yet, but if they're listening, you got 2 episodes mixed up, people. Okay, it's okay because it's a great series and you'll want to watch it all. But and very interesting and ties in with a lot of what we're talking about now. So that episode was called
Ice Age Shaman.
Mm-hmm. And we were discussing earlier how shaman was that the anthropologists came up with that term to cover a lot of things. It was so do you want to tell us a little bit about that, how that came up?
I can do, because the term has become sensitive or even controversial. So the word shaman originally comes from the Tungus tribe, which is a tribe in Siberia. Though I'm really into languages, you find similar related words in languages like Turkish and sort of countries that surround the USSR. So it wasn't only there, linguistically speaking, but there were anthropologists, I believe, in the 19th century who were doing that first work of, ethnography and sort of staying with people and, like learning about shamanic practices, what we call shamanic practices today. And because in Western culture, it's been like, if it was there at all, because then you can't call it shamanism, but because the pre-Christian spiritual ways were so long gone, the anthropologists were looking for a word. So what they ended up doing is they took the word shaman from the Tungus language, which means a person who sees or a seer, and they put ism behind it. So they used the word shaman, shamanism, and then you get the adjective shamanic. And they sort of brought that back because they had to find a word to describe, what they were writing in their reports. And then I think in the 20th century, as spirituality sort of made a kind of comeback in Western culture, and people were looking for spirituality all over. Some people turned to Buddhism or the Vedic teachings, or for others of Native American or Peruvian, or etc., etc. And then what happened, because we had lost the words for these practices, the words sort of shamanism and shaman, those words were used. Michael Hunter started core shamanism and the Foundation for Shamanic Studies. And then also what was a very small area of study that most people were not into, then sort of kind of mushroomed into the sort of almost like an industry it is today. It's become a much, much bigger thing than it was originally. And now, of course, we live in a time where countercultural appropriation is a really big issue. It is considered a form of theft to take something from another culture, or to use a Swedish word, to use other cultures like a smörgåsbord, like a sort of huge sort of, buffet where we go and take what we like. Like in our time, we think that's not okay anymore. So at the moment, we're being asked to, where possible, though, I mean, those words appear on my early books. I'm learning and evolving as I go, but I will own that. But also, reflecting my own journey of going ancestral and indigenous and looking what's, on my own land. I now try very hard to avoid those words and use, ancestral or local equivalents instead. But then, there's issues with that as well. And if I'm going to be I live in the UK and Sweden, I teach a lot in the US. If I'm going to be using a lot of sort of Dutch ancestral words, no one is going to understand me. So I still have the challenge of presenting that in English somehow. So there are issues.
So it's created a like some chaos in the world, because I know in earlier days, before I read you, before I met you, I looked up shaman in the dictionary. And it doesn't say anything about, where it originated, Siberia. It just says a form of journeying to other realms, kind of thing, and that's in the dictionary. So so they did take it. It became an academic word as opposed to a spiritual world word, in a way, at that point in
Yeah,
time.
it did. And then we have a lot of people, a lot of my colleagues now are opting for the word animism instead. And there's a lot of truth in that, because a lot of pre-Christian cultures, then you get a whole discussion like what is shamanic and what is like animist. But, my issue with that is that animism, yes, it was very widespread and our ancestors practiced it. So, and in that sense, it's a good word. But to me, there is a real difference between the two things, because in animism, you wouldn't work so easily with like deities and more, it's more like about nature spirits and the in spirit dwelling in everything. So, it's like it's quite a good way in English, but I don't think it fully covers what the word shamanism used to cover. But that's what a lot of my colleagues have done. What they used to call shamanism, now they call it animism. Yeah.
So what you can do is use more what the world is seeing as appropriate words, and
Yeah.
go to your own ancestry,
Mm-hmm.
unless you are married to someone from Sweden and
Yeah.
living in the UK and teaching in the US. That's your personal problem. Everybody has that problem, but I do like. I am sorry. I like the word that you came up with for Facebook, edgewalker. Right?
Yeah. That was
What was
yesterday.
that was
Yeah.
yesterday. He came up with that one yesterday, and I thought, well, that's good because it covers so many things, Imelda. It covers, walking on the edges of these two
Mm-hmm.
different worlds. It's like
Mm-hmm.
falling into something. I mean, I would say that your life plan is to fall into things. Like,
Yeah. And,
so many people ask you to do something, you're like, okay, I'll do it. Leave me alone.
yeah.
And there you'll do it.
But it is that process of, of walking on the edge and sometimes falling off the edge and coming back on. But also, I think I feel very much called to look at the more, the shadowy edges, the liminal, where edges meet the liminal zone and sort of, like looking where those kinds of boundaries are. And yeah, I fall on my face because that's part of that kind of work. But I think, yeah, edge walker, I've decided I'm going to roll with that in English anyway.
Yay! I like it. It can be the title of one. Okay, so I'm the first person to ask you, because I realize people asking you to write books has a lot of pull now. To ask you to write a book about edge walking and your
Okay.
personal experiences with it. Because yeah, I just want to see that term out there as much as possible. I do like it. And so your response to this on a personal level, because we all have the way we relate to things, is to just say, to apologize to the ancestors of whatever you can, and to from this moment, try to use other words and to be
Mm-hmm.
respectful about something. Because as you wrote, this all started, your path in this all started when you were a child, and you were asked by spirits to go out into the world and do these things. You had no idea that 40 years later you would come up with Edgewalker. Like,
Well, I don't know, that was I think maybe 40 or 50 years later. More than 4 years. Because like at that point I was maybe a 6-year-old kid and now I'm 56, so half a century.
okay, I was because this is important. Okay, this is an important moment on Fika. I would like to point this out. Imelda just said, I just shaved her age by 10 years, and because she's into ritual, she's into growth, she's into not fearing death. She just said, no, I'm 56. Those are all my years and I'm owning them.
Yeah, because I was just saying I really have an issue with that whole youth worshipping aspect of our culture and the death denial and all of it. So, I sort of believe, I said I'm very open about my age. I don't lie about it and I don't hide it because I hope in that other people see a little bit of modeling that it like can be okay. You don't need to shave 10 years off to be an acceptable human being, or it's like this is my station in life. I've lived 56 years to get here, and I'm grateful for those years. So to so then claim that I might be 46 and hope that this bad light on Zoom makes that likely, that's just not a game I'm going to play.
Well, also, you've had so many experiences that it's hard enough for people to believe you had them in 56 years, never mind 46 years. So it's going to start, it's going to start some negativity towards your credibility because they're like, there's no way that woman has done all this in 46 years,
But
right?
that's what my late mother always said. Imelda lives 3 lives at once. That's what my mother said.
So
But one
you
life
were
is
a
not enough.
and in 3 different places. No, at least 2, right? One on
Well,
Earth.
more, but yeah.
So okay, so we're back to, what are we back to, Imelda? We're all over the place here, which is good because we're hitting a lot of topics. Okay, I want to talk about your hag school, but I don't want people to think that I'm crazy here about this Yule goat thing. But this is a perfect example of how going back to recreate a spirituality or going back in history to find something out takes you to something that's very modern because Yule goats are very popular right now. You see them in all the stores and whatever. So how did Sweden, how did this, was it Sweden or Norway? But
Sweden.
Sweden, how did this little Yule goat end up in my Christmas store? Okay.
Well, I mean, what can I say? I think the Old Norse people had a very powerful mythology. And actually the word I prefer when I'm teaching is cosmology, because the word myth has 2 meanings. It's both a kind of ultimate truth that underlies reality, and the other meaning is fantasy, it's made up, it doesn't exist. So for that reason, I prefer to call it a cosmology, because we don't have everything left, but we have enough left to really have a sense of what the Old Norse people believed and how the Norse gods played a really big role in that. But then, with the Christianization of Europe, I've talked about it at length in my book about the Low Countries. A lot of that material was squashed out and stamped on and put away. Then in the Romantic period in Europe, it started to be discovered again. And people sort of co-ed it, but not quite with the academic standards we have today. But it was very exciting to find it all again. And people would sort of, work with the runes again. And there was a lot of material that had been not completely gone, but quite dormant. And then here it is, it's rediscovered and it's so exciting. But then I think what also happens is that the people who make the movies and the people who make the games are understandably always looking for inspiration. And I think, the Norse gods and the whole Norse way, also the Vikings speak to the imagination as well. So it's very rich pickings for the people who today make movies or write stories or design toys or whatever it may be. And, an issue that I have at the moment, if I sometimes want to run a search and I'm hoping to find a research paper, a serious research paper, I end up on the sort of fandom pages or the sort of, and
I
then,
know. Okay. I hear you.
and also a lot of these details, they don't fit. It's a bit like when Wagner worked with the whole waltzing cycle, that he kind of, he took the story, but he also put his own spin on it. Now you have, people are into music, classical music and opera cannot sort of separate off what is opera and what is Old Norse cosmology. And now we have even more confusion because people watch the movies and they think they know who Thor is or whatever. But actually, if you really want to know who Thor is, I think you're going to have to dig a little bit deeper and sort of go to the original story. So there's lots going on there, but also it's in a way also I think the gods are seeking to be alive again in our culture, and all of these creators are creating platforms for that. So I essentially think it's a good thing. I just think there can be some confusion in that, and a lot of poetic license.
Well, yes, and I mean we love that they do that. I'm not going to say that I don't like the portrayal of Thor in the Avengers, but it's always go. That's the point of stories. They evolve and they go with the
Yeah,
times, right? So it's always
yeah.
good to go back to the original writing of them. And I mean, that's simple enough to do because in the different countries, the Gutenberg project, they have all of that stuff up for free. So you don't even have
True.
to pay for it. You can just go in there, search, and there it is. Everybody. Neil Gaiman has a great book out on that. I mean, it is everywhere. But and I think we do. I'm going to say that I think that the video games in that are a great introduction to this because it is as children. I remember I watched a cartoon Thor back in the 60s, was it? Anyways, I can't remember how old I was, but it's this great hook, right? It is
Yeah.
that hooked
Yeah.
me into other things, myth like, and and so it's a great hook, and you just need to take that further and go back to find I think what
Yeah.
Moonbooks is doing now with all the gods and goddesses books
Yeah.
from the
Yeah.
different areas is great because you can just they're like quick references.
Yes, they are, and Moonbooks is my publisher, and I really love what they're doing there, and I sort of love the discussions between authors, like behind the scenes, the authors talk to each other, so it's really cool to be part of that. But another thing I want to say, like about the gods, is that it's not only I think about like going back and having the video version or the movie version, but the guidance that I receive, and I think a lot of my students on the land in the forest school in Sweden receive, is that just as we human beings evolve in partnership with the gods, the
Gods.
gods wish to continue to evolve as well. They don't want to stand still either. They're like powerful beings and they wish to evolve. And one of the ways they do that is through their partnership with human beings. So what I say to all of my students is that it works both ways. It really is a partnership and not a dictatorship. The dictatorship.
Which is one thing that makes those gods and goddesses different than many of the religion based things that we see today is that it was more equal. They were not perfect. They interacted with people. They had their yes, they really interacted with people. they had they had their good moments and their bad moments, and it's just you can take templates of whatever they do and apply them to your life to a degree.
Yeah, exactly. And there's wisdom teachings and that mythology. I think that's what mythology ultimately is. That's why I called it like, to me, a true myth is like a wisdom teaching that's really ancient. But as it in our culture, we'll say, oh, it's a myth, and like it's so that's interesting.
It's less respected because they threw that all into stories for children, right? They hid them. All those stories became children's stories, but they're not really.
But it may also be that that's how stories survived. I wrote about that in a book about the Low Countries. That there is some evidence to suggest that in the times of like the witch hunts and the whole persecution, that
Yeah.
the people who like knew that like the pre-Christian material, that like you just like couldn't do that openly anymore. You could lose your life for that. And then you talked in an email to me about like Mother Goose, but like fairy tales and nursery rhymes and the stories of Mother Goose may well be that people in the past who saw that coming or lived at that time of the Inquisition decided to put these really ancient teachings into stories for children because no one paid attention to that. And that's why we have them
Exactly.
today. So don't knock stories for children. I
Oh
write books for
no no
children.
no no! Which brings on to the other. It's a perfect way. I do not knock stories for children, but
No,
I'm
I know you
saying
don't.
that there are people out there who today you can't say. If you go to talk about something, they're like, "Oh, fairy tales." Like fairy tales
Yeah,
are my
yeah,
life.
yeah.
But if I want to have a discussion about fairy tales, I've had people say, "Well, those are kids' stories," and I'm like, "No, no, no, no,
Uh-uh.
no."
No,
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 I
no.
don't say no, no. I just say I walk away because this is not going anywhere. Don't do that. But I'm saying they were hidden there for a reason. But it would be nice if some individuals would just see that they were hidden there for a reason and that they have a great a lot of things to tell us, right?
Yeah,
As
they do. Yeah,
even as
they do.
adults. So speaking of how much you love children's books, that was a perfect segue. You have a series of your own. Um, the it's the green bear, right? I've looked
Yeah,
at
it's the
pictures
green
of
bear.
I've looked at pictures. I mean, the artwork is marvelous, like all of your artwork, which we haven't even touched on. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that, or?
Yeah. No, it was like a dream that I had for a really long time, but I'm always so busy with too many things. So when the pandemic started and we all went into lockdown, and I could only teach online, but I couldn't, so I had to cancel all my in-person commitments. Like amazingly, there was that bit of space in the week and in the diary. So I asked myself, okay, we're in a pandemic now. I don't know how long the lockdowns are gonna last. Like, is there something that this allows me to do that I wouldn't normally get to? And then it was to write a series of picture books for children. And that's based on there is behind my forest school and house in Sweden, and the house sits in the forest and it's very remote. So you don't see other human beings there unless they're students. So it's very like the deep dark forest and the sea. And there is like many boulders from the ice age in the forest, and there's this one big rock which is really mossy and there's a lot of lichen on it. And I happened to be walking there one day. Sometimes I can play the cello in the forest as well, just sit on it and play the cello. And then one day that rock spoke back to me and it said, I look like a rock, but I'm really a bear. I'm the green bear. And it started telling me all of these stories, and these stories about that, in what is really our forest house in another dimension. That's a house where two children live, two twins. And the green bear takes them on all of these adventures to the night sky and to the forest witch and all of these things. So I used part of like the time freed up by the pandemic to write 3 books in the series. I have more coming, but it's finding the time to do all of the artwork. I have the stories. And these books are very much about like they're very very playful, but they're for me part of children have an innate ability to travel through portals and to be edge walkers and to be open to the spirits and the trees and the animals. So these books are about just sort of encouraging that and like showing a bit how it's done and how beautiful it is. And I just hope that it will help some children to keep that sense of magic alive as they grow older and they're under more pressures to conform to, what we believe in society.
So yeah, yes, I like that explanation, and I like if you go to her Imelda's YouTube channel, I believe there's a video there that you get to see the rock, the green bear, in.
Yeah, I think there
Um,
is one. Yes.
yeah, I was looking at that, and I thought, oh, that's cool. Uh, so thank you for that. If you have young people in your lives and you're very much about the magic of story, definitely check these out. I might, if I get my little library going, do that for some of the children in the neighborhood. It's an important thing to do. Now, in your, which we, this is in medicine of the imagination and dwelling in possibilities, an impassioned plea for fearless imagination.
Mm.
It is a big thinking book. Right, Imelda? Like
It is.
just reading. It's a big thinking book.
It's a
It's an
big thing.
important book. Yeah, I encourage you to read it because there's many activities and many things to do in it, and that's what I'm saying. I got to go back and do those. But added to that title is an impassioned plea for fearless imagination. Now we were talking
Yeah.
a bit about the fear of death, and other things that people have, but why? Why should we not imagine fearful things? What are we?
Well, it's not so much that as that I find it extraordinary. If you trace back, we just talked about fairy tales and we talked about ancestors, and human beings very much interact with the world through their imagination. We use imagination to understand other people and put ourselves in the shoes of others. It's a huge interface between us and the world. And I just find it extraordinary. We go to school, we learn math, we learn history, we learn English, or whatever it may be. But there is actually nothing out there that helps us see where the pitfalls are in our imagination. So we're born with an imagination. And if we're lucky, we have good parents who feed that imagination and good teachers and a good community and people around us. Not everyone is so fortunate. So there can also be wounds that occur to the human imagination. And then as we grow up, though we use our imagination all of the time, and it's very much a tool also we use to create and to leave our mark in the world. So it's a huge thing. And yet very few people ever reflect on how they use their imagination and what happens if the human imagination misfires. And in my book, I also gave examples of that. There's like, atrocities that occur because people use their imagination. And this was the book that I had not planned to write, by the way. I had just sent my final manuscript for the book about sacred art, which is book number 2, nonfiction book number 2, to my publisher. I thought, yay, I'm going to paint, I'm going to have some time of writing. And that evening, the spirits came and said, you have to write a book. The title is Medicine of the Imagination. Start tomorrow. And I was like, it's like the Dutch book that came next. It's like, I don't want to do this. I want some time off. But then also, again, as once I engaged with it, I realized it's a really big thing. And I'm a painter, I'm an artist. So, and also a lot of the courses I do with students, the imagination is one of the tools that we use, our imagination, the spirits, ceremony, all of these things, ancestral wisdom teachings. So, it made sense. But I think of it as the book that I'd never planned to write. So there's now 2 books, both that one and the book about the Low Countries, were books I had not intended to write, but got written anyway, because, I was put under pressure to do it.
Well, and I'm very glad that you did. There is a lot in those books. I need to go back. But it is a very interesting concept when you say imagination is a big part of our lives, and how we use it and how we there are, you have a lot of examples, and stuff from everything from the FBI to like ancient studies. Like there's all these quotes and all this information, and there should be, because even when we imagine what's going to happen, if we imagine that a situation is going to be negative, like a job interview,
Yeah.
we're always a little nervous with a job interview, but that brings the anxiety and that up there. We should have how to use your imagination 101. That's a good idea. Now you need to get on that course.
Yeah, but also like do shadow work and be more self-reflective. Say, I entered the situation with these assumptions and my imagination colored it this way. And then how did that actually pan out? Like we should actually put ourselves through exercise to see, okay, now next time I face a similar situation, I'm really going to actively use my imagination and sort of make an effort to sort of more make it come out the way I want it to come out, and sort of really catch myself on all the shadow material and then ask myself, like, why do I have, negative thoughts, or why do I undermine myself? Why do I sabotage myself? And then when you sort of start sort of, because like I'm not into false positivity. I'm not one of these people who says
No,
not at all. I'm very much, edge walker. I have a very forensic mind. But still, I have certainly seen in my own life that the way I harness, that's why I used the word harness, but over the years, I've learned to harness my imagination to get my job done and to deliver what, like people expect of me. And then I sort of realized there are really good ways of engaging with my own imagination. There are also really, not so great ways where I'm actually producing the results I don't want to see in the world. And it comes from my imagination. So I have personal responsibility for that.
So it's more of the cause and effect of imagination, as opposed to, if I imagine this, it will be.
Well,
you have to do. Well, to an extent, but you know what I'm saying. What we think, but we have to sort of tinker with it a bit.
You have to think of it. Also, I believe that we very much co-create. Like I believe that I don't know if the world was created in 7 days. I'm more sort of go with the scientific story. But at the end of the day, I do not believe that creation happened whenever it was. I believe creation is always going on. And if we have the privilege of being alive, our entire life is a contribution to that process. So for me, like being aware of like actively choosing what I create, or if I see myself creating something I'm not proud of, to actually do the work, like so to speak, deleting it or unraveling it or taking it back and taking responsibility for that. I think that's really important. And I'm not saying that we have full control over that, because also we co-create with the gods and the spirits, and there are a lot of other people out there using their imagination as well. So of course I can't just create whatever I like, then it would be world peace tomorrow. And I don't have the power to do that. But I still remain responsible for what I put out there in the world.
So taking personal responsibility and putting a little thought into what you are creating.
Yeah.
Is
What am I
is
sending out there? Like, what am I actually anchoring by? Like, behaving the way I do. Yeah.
and that is a very short explanation of the book.
Yes.
For you. So, but I say this is a good book to get to really think. If you want to really think about why you take the actions that you take and how. Yeah, no, um I'm definitely saying go for it. Go for it, people. But just take some time and don't get it on a busy week. Okay. Take
Like,
some
read
time
it
with it.
slowly and do this chapter exercises before you do the next
Yes,
chapter. Yeah.
and do the exercises because they will take you along. Don't read it for oh my god, Fika on Thursday. I want to finish this book before that. It's not going to work. That is not going to happen. Okay, we've got a couple more minutes, and like I said, come back anytime, Imelda. I love this, and I love the
Oh,
thought
I
of
would
it.
love to. I really enjoyed talking to you.
Oh, me too. Um, your hag school. Tell
Yes.
us about that, how it works. There's videos on your YouTube channel for it.
Yes, I have a YouTube channel. I also have an online school called Pregnant Hack Teachings, where I upload all my online classes, all my webinars. They're like all sorts of courses there, and people can watch that in their own time. So you can arrive 2 years later and still do an entire class. And I think that's another good thing that came out of the pandemic, because I wasn't teaching online so much before the pandemic, and now since the pandemic, I have a series of books for children, and I have an online school where people can, enroll anytime, and they can do any class they want to do. So it's a good thing.
So yeah, no, it is. I've watched some of those videos too, and they're really informative and thought provoking, and just Imelda. That's just who she is,
Yeah,
and that's what
yeah.
comes out. It's just an Imelda thing. So, um, so oh, Jay wanted to say thank you for the answer you gave about way at the beginning of the show. The shaman. We were talking so much, I didn't get back to that. And you're welcome, James, that we shared this show. So I had a blast. Okay, reread these books and do the activities like a good girl. And yeah, so and um, we'll get back together again. Okay.
No, let's
So
do it. Thank you.
no, thank you. It was fun. So I'm going to say goodbye to you now. Well, before I do my other goodbye, and yeah, great. I'll send you some links in that after where the show
And I'll
goes. So,
spread them all over social media and newsletter and all of those things. Thank you so
oh well,
much.
thank you. Okay, bye bye.
Okay.
All right, so that was lots of fun. Got the old brain zooming along. Um, Next week, our guest and a very good friend is author Wayne Mellows of the Vampire Tales. It's been a while since we chatted writing, so I'm really looking forward to this. Um, but for you, because the show's about you too, if you like character driven, well researched historical fiction, you're going to watch this. It's set in the 19th century London, and I can feel the mist rising already with the mysterious. So you're going to want to be here for that. I want to thank everybody for coming, and until next week, may your coffee be hot and your stories sweet. Thank you for listening, everyone. And we'll just put I'm just so charged from the show, okay? And all that talking. I'm having trouble thinking, but here's the ending music. Thanks, guys.